They sent me a fruit basket the day after they fired me, wrapped in gold ribbon, filled with imported pears and blood oranges, topped with a card that read, "Wishing you new beginnings." I sat there staring at it from the marble kitchen island of my high-rise condo, the taste of betrayal metallic in my mouth. It wasn't the firing that shocked me. Not really. It was the speed of it, the suddenness, and the performance of false kindness after that's what made it personal. Let me back up. My name is Dana Wallace, 45. Former Chief Strategy Officer at Ravenholt Partners, one of the most aggressively expanding private equity firms on the East Coast. For 15 years, I was the engine that kept Ravenholt moving forward through hostile takeovers, economic downturns, partner scandals, and all the egos that circled that boardroom like sharks. I outworked them, outnegotiated them, outsurvived every man who assumed I'd flinch under pressure. I didn't. But in the end, I made one mistake. I trusted the wrong protege. Her name was Elise Grant. Early 30s, brisk, hyper-competent, flattering in all the ways that disarmed me. I should have known better. She started in my department as a senior analyst, bright, quick on her feet, with that particular polish that suggested private schools and careful grooming. The first few months, she asked questions constantly, sharp ones, the kind that showed she wasn't just intelligent, but strategic. I liked that about her. Most of the young hires either idolized or feared me. She didn't. She respected me but pushed back, challenged ideas without undermining. Or so I thought. I began pulling her into more sensitive meetings, deal negotiations, internal audits, conflict resolution sessions with underperforming VPs. I was grooming her in hindsight, maybe because I saw a version of my younger self in her, hungry, underestimated, quietly dangerous, and maybe, if I'm honest, because I was getting tired, not of the work, but of being surrounded by men who never listened unless I spoke like thunder. Elise became my shadow. She carried 2 phones. She remembered things I didn't realize I'd said. She made herself indispensable. Until she didn't. The moment came on a Thursday morning in March. Rainy. Cold. I remember because I was wearing the black wool coat my mother left me, structured, severe, with wide shoulders. I walked into the building like I always did. Badge scan. Elevator to the 42nd floor. Smile at the receptionist. Black coffee from the machine I insisted on keeping outside my office instead of the break room. I opened my email. Subject line: Executive realignment. Immediate effect. At first, I assumed it was an internal notice, HR jargon, but it was addressed directly to me. In the body: We appreciate your many contributions over the years. However, the firm is moving in a new direction. Effective immediately, your employment with Ravenholt Partners is terminated. No meeting, no warning, no explanation, just that. I sat there for nearly 5 full minutes without blinking. Then I stood up, walked to my office door and closed it quietly. 30 minutes later, security escorted me out. No one met my eyes, not the junior associates I'd mentored, not the partners whose portfolios I'd personally rescued, not Elise, who stood at the end of the hallway pretending to look at her phone. That evening, the fruit basket arrived. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't call anyone. I simply opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving, 2012 Chateau Margaux, and drank a single glass in silence, watching the Chicago skyline flicker against the glass. And then I went to work. You see, I keep everything: emails, notes, signed drafts, version histories, calendar invites, recordings. Not because I'm paranoid, because I'm methodical. Over the years, I developed a habit. Whenever I was about to enter a high-stakes meeting, particularly if it involved back-channel deals or internal politics, I would hit record on my private line. Not admissible in court maybe, but useful, immensely useful. Elise didn't know that. She also didn't know I'd kept a copy of the original strategic framework I wrote for the Virex acquisition, the one she later presented to the board under her name. She didn't know I'd backed up all internal communications surrounding the Wexley deal, including the memo where she convinced the partners to bypass due diligence on the vendor vetting. And she sure as hell didn't know I had an encrypted folder titled Insurance. I didn't act immediately. That's not how you do it. I watched, I listened, I waited. In the weeks that followed, I tracked Elise's ascent from LinkedIn updates and press releases. She'd been promoted to Executive Director of Strategy, my title, my office, my seat at the quarterly summit. The narrative they pushed: I had voluntarily stepped aside to pursue new opportunities. The reality: they'd used me, hollowed me out, stripped my name from every success, and handed it to someone new with better optics, younger, paler, easier to mold. But I knew Ravenholt better than anyone. I knew their cracks, their pressure points. The founders were obsessed with perception. They couldn't afford scandal, not in the middle of two sensitive IPO negotiations and an international expansion. So I began crafting a new narrative, not one of outrage, not one of victimhood, one of control. First, I reached out to reporters, discreetly, off the record, background sources only, financial journalists who'd covered Ravenholt's aggressive growth. I planted questions about the Wexley deal, about compliance irregularities, about asset overstatement. I gave them just enough to look deeper. Next, I contacted a former contact at the SEC, not to report, to inquire. I framed it as professional curiosity. Have you seen the filings on Ravenholt's last merger? Some inconsistencies are interesting, might be nothing. Then I scheduled an appointment with someone I hadn't seen in 6 years, Adrian Marks, litigator, relentless, brilliant, and once, my lover. We met in a bar in the Loop, neutral ground. He wore the same tailored suits and cologne, still didn't smile unless he meant it. I laid out what I had. He listened in silence. When I finished, he swirled his scotch and said, "You're not looking for a lawsuit." "No," I replied. "I'm looking for leverage." He nodded slowly. "Then you've come to the right place." Adrian and I spent the next 2 weeks building the architecture. He called it quiet pressure, a methodical application of leverage, designed not to explode the company, but to control it, not to ruin Elise, but to disarm her. "Reputation is the currency in your world," he said. "Let's bleed theirs slowly." He assembled a network: journalists, compliance auditors, private investigators, most of them people who owed him favors. I played the strategist, feeding data, connections, name. Elise had no idea what was coming. That was the point. The first tremor hit when a financial blogger, small but credible, published a report questioning Ravenholt's due diligence process in the Wexley merger. The article cited anonymous internal sources and suggested falsified vendor assessments. The firm dismissed it publicly, but behind closed doors, I knew exactly what would happen: panic. 3 days later, the Chicago Tribune ran a deeper piece. Same story, more Elise's name was mentioned, once as a rising executive whose oversight was notably absent from the official record. I imagined her reading it at her desk, that perfect composure cracking just slightly. Then came the whistleblower inquiry from the SEC, not an official investigation yet, just a request for clarification. Clarification in this case meant internal review, legal teams, questions, meetings, and Elise's name appearing in email threads she hadn't authored, but definitely forwarded. That was week 3. In week 4, I delivered the kill shot. An anonymous tip landed at the inbox of Ravenholt's primary institutional investor, Tellinger Capital. It included screenshots of internal documents showing Elise had greenlit a risky investment without board approval, falsified a risk rating to push it through, and rerouted due diligence to a third-party firm with known conflicts of interest. All true, all traceable. Because I'd saved everything. Ravenholt's stock dipped 6% in 2 days. Elise was summoned to a closed-door session with senior partners. No press release this time, no announcements, just silence. She disappeared from the firm's internal org chart by the end of the week. People started calling me. At first, it was subtle. "Are you consulting? Would you ever consider coming back, in a different capacity? Maybe board advisory?" I ignored the first 3. Then Adrian said, "You've made your point. Now decide what you want." What I wanted was bigger than a return. I wanted control. Ravenholt had a weakness, a splintered leadership structure. The founders had equal voting shares, but they hated each other. The only thing they agreed on was not letting outsiders in. But the firm had grown too fast. They needed stability, respectability. They needed someone with the gravitas to clean up the mess, quietly. That someone was me. So I made a proposal. I sent it to the managing partner directly. A transition plan. I wouldn't return to the executive floor. I would come in as an external consultant, under a 6-month contract with full access, oversight over compliance and strategy, non-negotiable terms, and one final clause: Elise Grant will never work in finance again, not under your banner, not through a shell firm, not under a different name. 3 hours later, I received a one-line response: deal. I arrived on the 42nd floor on a Monday morning wearing the same black wool coat I'd worn the day they fired me. People stared, some stood, some turned away. I didn't acknowledge any of them. I walked directly to the executive suite where my new office, a temporary one, had been set up. It wasn't as grand as my old corner space, but it didn't need to be, because now everyone knew I didn't need a title to run the firm. I held meetings with each of the partners, one by one. They were careful, deferential. They knew I had the power to bring it all down, and I knew they wouldn't dare cross me again. On day 3, I received a visitor, Elise. She was thinner, tired, her usual armor of confidence replaced by something brittle. She entered without knocking, clutching a manila folder. "I don't want to fight," she said softly. "Then don't," I replied, not offering her a seat. "I made mistakes," she said. "I let ambition get ahead of loyalty." "No," I corrected. "You let arrogance get ahead of reality." She flinched. "I thought you were invincible. I didn't think you'd see it coming." "That was your first mistake," I said. "Your second was thinking I'd let it go." She placed the folder on my desk. "These are all my formal resignation, board memberships, affiliations, financial disclosures. I'll sign anything you want." I didn't touch the folder. "Why are you really here?" Her voice cracked. "I don't want this to follow me forever." "It will," I said. She nodded slowly, as if accepting a sentence she'd been bracing for. "You're brilliant, Dana," she whispered, "but you're terrifying." I leaned forward, just slightly. "You should be grateful I'm only one of those." She left without another word. I never saw her again. The next 6 months were an exercise in precision. I rewrote policy, reorganized teams, removed weak links, every decision calculated, every recommendation backed by data, not politics. I didn't rebuild Ravenholt to help them. I rebuilt it because their survival was now my currency. My influence extended beyond the boardroom. Competitors noticed, industry forums shifted, clients whispered my name with caution and respect. And slowly, headlines changed. Dana Wallace returns as architect of stability. Ravenholt's comeback. The woman behind the strategy. I accepted none of the interview requests. I didn't need publicity. I needed positioning. The plan was never to stay. The plan was to cement a legacy, so undeniable they couldn't erase me again. By the 4th month I had achieved operational control without ever accepting a title. My decisions were implemented without question. My name appeared in internal memos without footnotes. I received more stock options in 90 days than I had in 5 years on payroll. Then came the board meeting. The official agenda, long-term succession planning. Unofficially, they were nervous. They saw the market changing, ESG pressure, diversity demands, digital transformation they didn't understand. They were ready to name a successor to the founding partners, someone they could install, control, present to the world as modern leadership. They expected me to decline. They thought I'd refuse out of pride. I didn't. I accepted, not to be their figurehead, to be their reckoning. 3 months later, I became the first female managing director in Ravenholt's history. No press release, no champagne, no family legacy, just a signed vote, a new access badge and an email that began effective immediately. Dana Wallace will assume full executive oversight. I didn't celebrate. I worked. For 2 weeks straight I did nothing but review contracts, internal deals, risk profiles. I built a firewall between the firm and the fallout Elise had left behind. I implemented ethics audits. I hired third-party consultants. I made everything bulletproof. And then I turned to the last item on my list, the one marked closure. Elise had vanished from the financial sector, but she hadn't disappeared. She was consulting quietly under a different name for an investment group in Austin. Boutique, low profile, but not invisible. I didn't need to destroy her. That would have been too easy. I needed to make sure she understood. So I sent her a single envelope, no letter, just a copy of the original strategy deck for the Virex acquisition, my name on every slide, my notes in the margin, my version history printed and annotated. Inside was a second document, a cease and desist notice, legal binding and perfectly enforceable, restricting her from offering strategic services in any financial capacity for 5 years. She responded within 48 hours. The email was short. "You win." No signature, no plea, no defiance, just recognition. That was enough. The following spring, I hosted a private event on the top floor of the Pendry. No investors, no partners, just the women I'd mentored, current and former employees, some I'd fought with, some I'd fired. I stood in front of them that evening, a glass of champagne in one hand, the skyline behind me. "I built Ravenholt once," I told them. "They stripped my name from the foundation, so I rebuilt it in stone." They didn't cheer. They listened, they understood, because every woman in that room had a story, a betrayal, a moment of erasure. I gave them something rare, proof that revenge doesn't have to be loud, it just has to be complete. In the months that followed, I solidified my position not just within Ravenholt, but across the industry. I didn't just lead. I redefined what leadership looked like. I introduced mandatory executive coaching. I enforced clawback clauses. I dismantled the old boys' back channel that had once dictated promotions over scotch. People said I was ruthless. They were right, but they also said something else, that I was fair, that I listened, that I made decisions with precision, not ego. That mattered more than any headline. One afternoon in June, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer. Dana? The voice was quiet, familiar. Speaking. It's Elise. I didn't reply. I'm not calling to ask for anything, she said. I just needed to say something. Silence on my end. I learned more from watching you than I ever did from betraying you, she continued. And I want you to know, I regret it. You had a choice, I said. I know. You weren't the first to underestimate me. I won't make that mistake again, she whispered. I didn't respond. I hung up. That night, I made myself a martini, sat on my terrace, watched the lights over the lake, and for the first time in years, I felt still, not vindicated, not victorious, just whole. The revenge wasn't about revenge anymore. It had become something else, restoration, control, proof to myself that no matter how calculated the betrayal, I was always 10 steps ahead. I didn't need to burn everything down to win. I just needed to show them what it looked like when the architect took the blueprints back. 6 months into my tenure as managing director, I created a new division at Ravenholt, Strategic Integrity. Its purpose to identify and develop women at all levels of finance who'd been sidelined, passed over, used, erased. We didn't offer charity. We offered precision tools, training, placement, political navigation, quiet alliances. I called it the contingency program. The name was a nod to my encrypted folder, the one that started all of this. I didn't run the program directly. I hired someone better. A woman I once fired not because she wasn't brilliant, but because she wasn't ready. She was now, and she made the program her own. Its first year, we placed 27 women in positions of senior strategic influence, 4 of them at companies that once tried to bury me. I started getting letters, not emails, not calls, letters, handwritten, from women who'd read about the program, who'd worked under me, who'd heard the story. They wrote to say one thing: you made space. And that, more than Elise's apology, more than the title, more than the rebuilt empire, is what stayed with me. Because revenge done right isn't just about power, it's about legacy. The kind that can't be stolen or reassigned, the kind that lasts. And that was what I came back for. Not to reclaim what was mine, to redefine what could never be taken again. The day I stepped down from Ravenholt, I did it on my terms. No forced resignation, no scandal, no whispered boardroom betrayal, just a letter, 4 sentences long, delivered in a sealed envelope to the executive committee, effective immediately. No ceremony, no farewell party, no fanfare. I didn't need applause, I needed exit velocity. I spent my last hour on the 42nd floor in the same temporary office they first offered me. The view hadn't changed, but I had. I packed only one thing: the original strategy deck with my handwritten notes, the one Elise once tried to erase. That end of the week, I was in Lisbon, quiet, untraceable, free, no meetings, no headlines, no expectations, just air, space, silence, and clarity. I began writing, not a memoir, not a tell-all, a manual, a strategic framework for women navigating male-dominated power structures. No sentiment, no fluff, just tact. How to identify threats, how to build leverage, how to survive a betrayal and use it, how to win without being invited. I titled it, The Contingency Plan. Within a year it became a covert staple inside corporate circles, passed between assistants, inundated by analysts, kept in desk drawers by rising executives who recognized the moves, the language, the blueprint. They never connected the author to me. That was intentional, because power, real power, doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It leaves fingerprints without signatures. It reshapes rooms without stepping into them. It's quiet, calculated, final, just like revenge should be. So if you're reading this, if you've been passed over, if your name has been erased, if your work has been claimed by someone with a brighter smile or a better pedigree, let me say this. You're not done. You're not broken. You're just in the quiet part of the story, the part before the reckoning, before they remember exactly who built the foundation they're now standing on. And when that day comes, don't yell, don't beg, don't warn. Just act strategically, intelligently, precisely, like I did, like you will.